Hello everyone and welcome back once again to ThursDev. My name is Luke, and after a lengthy break for our migration over to level 0 Gamedev and for the mini-series we did during Horror Month, we are finally picking back up where we left off in our talk about analytics, metrics, and the developers who love them. As a quick refresher, up to the last episode, we spent some time talking about retention, or the statistics that tell us how many players are not just playing our game, but for how long, and by proxy also how well you, as a developer, are doing at keeping your players coming back for more. We looked at engagement mechanics and their impacts on retention and why this is something that we want to be paying attention to. As I mentioned during those videos, retention is a metric that's particularly important to the developer that wants to maintain their player base beyond the first purchase, or in the case of the free-to-play model, keep their players playing the game past their first launch. Today's talk will be on the concepts of conversion and the way that we measure monetization, both particularly significant to the games as a service business model, if not essentially the core tenet thereof. On monetization, this is a topic that I went into great detail in during our business model series, so I'm just going to skim the topic a bit today, but I'll direct you over there for a more deep dive. Today we're going to look at monetization as a performance metric and the inextricably important metric of conversion. So what is conversion? In the context of video game analytics, conversion refers to the percentage of players of your game that have spent any money on the game, converting from non-paying to paying players. As one might rightly expect, in the case of a premium game with no microtransactions to speak of, conversion is a non-issue. Every possible player of the game is a paying player, as they spent their money before they even played the game. This is known as the premium or product business model. It treats the game as a single, discrete, purchasable item. I did a video a while ago that explains the concepts around the games as a service model, so I'll direct you over there for a more detailed look, but the short version is that instead of following the traditional premium product model, where the consumer purchases the game and beyond that the creator of the product has no investment, we're seeing a massive influx, and have over the past few years, in the games industry of adoption of the games as a service model, which puts the game into the hands of the consumer at a decreased or even non-existent cost, with the promise of ongoing updates and continued support to the product. In said model, the most common price of admission is free. There are hybrid games that ask for a price up front and also offer microtransactions, and are becoming even more popular as time goes on, but free-to-play is still sort of dominating the market by and large. When your primary source of income is then based around a fraction of your players that are willing to monetize and possibly some minor amount of ad revenue, it becomes important that you have a good idea of two very important factors: what percentage of your user base are monetizing and how much they're spending. These are broken down into a few fairly well-defined and thankfully pretty easy to track metrics: conversion rate, ARPX, and LTV. You'll recognize those from our Games as a Service video if you've already watched it, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. Let's look at them individually and how we measure them. Conversion rate is measured by comparing the number of players that have paid any amount of money in your game, be it 99 cents or $99, against the total number of players. We break this down further into individual spans of time: lifetime conversion, day 1 conversion, day 7 conversion, day 30, and so on. You'll notice that this is fairly consistent with the conventions of measurement that we set with retention before. One can typically expect conversion to average around 2% or lower for the 75th percentile of games, meaning games that are in the top 25% of earners. I've heard as low as 1.5 to even 0.3% in some dire, more recent reports on conversion, but this only serves to reinforce the point that the market is also becoming more and more difficult to thrive in, as it was as high as 5% back in 2011. So those 2% account for all of the revenue that the games are typically making. We care about conversion rate, not specifically because we want to depress ourselves about how few players actually want to spend any money on the games that we're making, but instead to understand how effective the mechanics that we have in place for monetization are behaving. A high or low conversion rate tells us if our business model is successful and the systems that we have in place are attractive enough for our users to pay for. If a large number of players are converting, it means that you have something for sale that lots of people are buying, and that's fantastic. When we've established that, though, we don't want to rest on our laurels, because even a high conversion rate can be problematic if our prices are wrong and we're not making enough revenue to sustain us. We measure revenue with a suite of metrics that I call the ARPX, or ARPX metrics. These are a handful of metrics that measure the average revenue per a large number of different factors. I'm going to go over the most frequently cited and why we pay attention to each. I'll start with the most broad metric, average revenue per user, or ARPU, which divides total revenue over the entire user base. This tells us overall how much the game is worth. Think of it as an extrapolated product price. Though it's gained from a very small fraction of your total user base, it tells you the value of your game in relation to your user base during a span of time. And if your data is reliable, it should also mean that scaling up those users will lead to a proportional increase in revenue. ARPU is also used in the calculation of lifetime value, or LTV, which I mentioned above, which we'll slot in right here, which essentially is your lifetime ARPU for the game. This is an extremely volatile number, however, as it needs to be constantly topped up, as it were, or it continues to drop with time. LTV is the ideal starting measure to decide on how much you can afford to spend in user acquisition, as spending more than you're making per user is going to lead to negative profits. Next, we have average revenue per paying user, or ARPAPU, which divides total revenue among those 2% of your user base that are actually paying. This is more valuable in telling you if your IAPs are valuable to your players, or if you could stand to either add something of higher value or raise the price of what you're already offering. If your ARPAPU is low, even together with a high conversion rate, it means that your prices are set too low, or that your users are only interested in the cheapest offering you have, which could mean that your higher cost items value is less visible, or your lowest cost items value is too good to bother with the higher ones. Cheap IAPs cannibalizing your more valuable ones is a surprisingly common cause of low revenue. Average revenue per daily active user, or ARPDAU, which divides total daily revenue by the number of users that logged in during the span of that day, is similar in many ways to ARPU. Where ARPU gives you the total value of your game among all users, ARPDAU gives you a better view of the health of your game's economy, best monitored over a period of time. If your ARPDAU rises or falls, you'll have a point of reference to begin investigating what you might have done in your game to raise the perceived value of your game for your user base at large during that period of time. The final of the big four is average revenue per daily active consumer, or ARPDAC, which divides total daily revenue by the users that paid on a given day. Like ARPDAU, it's another measure of your daily game economy health, an even greater indicator of the performance of your IAPs, as it's a direct view into whether users that are predisposed to pay for your game are doing so for larger or smaller IAPs. In all of the above cases, it behooves you, the developer, to be monitoring not only the revenue that's being generated, but to track where those purchases are going in your game. If, like most normal free-to-play games, your game uses a premium currency in the game, that's a currency that's bought with real money and then used to allow the players to make transactions within the game without charging for each IAP individually, you won't be able to get that information directly from a revenue report from one of your release platforms. You'll want to ensure that your individual sales offers are instrumented correctly to know exactly what people are buying, which will be imperative in making informed design decisions. By tracking what these gems or gold or whatever are being spent on, you can make informed decisions about how to better design your monetization in your game, and that's going to be the big focus of our next video in the series. How to design with conversion and revenue in mind. This one is probably going to piss some people off if all the foofara around loot boxes and so on is anything to go off of. But for now though, I wanted to just thank you very much for joining me in this episode of ThursDev. If you enjoyed what you saw here, subscribing to the channel will help us grow and make it to an even broader audience. Also, do feel free to strike up some conversation in the comment section below. I try to make a point to respond to anything that I see that I have something useful to contribute to. I appreciate everyone that takes the time to come by and enjoy the content that we create. So I'll see you again next week, but until then, take care.